Lost Media.
Welcome to the Independent Voter Podcast from Independent Voter Project. We're going to expand a little bit. A new era of independent voter news that the journalists just don't cover, where we have these debates on a national level, really taking on issues so that people have more educated disagreements with each other. Let's just explain how the process really works.
Lost Media.
Welcome to the Independent Voter Podcast from Independent Voter Project. We're going to expand a little bit. A new era of independent voter news that the journalists just don't cover, where we have these debates on a national level, really taking on issues so that people have more educated disagreements with each other. Just explain how the process really works.
Well, I'm back again here with my friend on the opposite coast, Cara McCormick. This episode, it's funny, we've been talking about voting rights and independent voter rights for 15 years or so now, and I don't know if it's ever been this much of like it is the national issue right now. You're seeing these gerrymandering wars between Texas, California, now is expanding to Missouri and Nevada. Well, Nevada's going the opposite direction. There's rumors of an independent commission coming from there. So the conversation's being had. The Texas GOP just came out and said that they're going to file a lawsuit to close Texas's open primaries. And this comes at a time where Independent Voter Project on IVN is going to be about to publish an article called, How It Really Works. Your right to vote. And is it really meaningful? Cara, I want to, if we can today, let's kind of get an update on what's going on in this gerrymandering battle, what's going on with these primary election lawsuits, and what the heck does this have to do with your right to vote? Why don't you start and tell me, you just wrote an article on what's going on in Missouri, right? We did a lot of discussion about Texas, and then, California's reaction is like, well, if you're going to gerrymander and violate the rights of your voters, we're going to do it even more. And then now Missouri's in the game. So what's going on there?
Yeah, so we have California Texas moved first and said, we're going to create 5 new seats for Republicans in Texas. And California said, okay, if you're going to do that, then we're going to try to create 5 new Democratic seats in California. And so that sort of would leave a stasis. Of course, California has to go through a whole election. Their voters have to approve the change, and they'll have to get rid of their independent redistricting commission for the next 5 years in order to change those rules. But they're going for it. And now it looks like Missouri is the latest state to move a piece on the chessboard. They have a Republican-controlled House and Senate and governor's office. And so they're going to try to move from, I believe, they control now 6 of the state's 8 congressional seats, and they're going to try to make that 7 by redistricting Emanuel Cleaver, who's been in office, forever. They're going to try to redistrict him out of his seat, which is in Kansas City. And, it's real. The one interesting thing that happened in Missouri this week is that there were, I believe, 13 Republicans who refused to go along with the governor and majority's Republican redistricting plan. So that's really interesting.
Well, I mean, you see it, and there's California. There's Democrats that really do not want to go along with this plan. I mean, California has an independent redistricting commission. So they're literally saying, hey, we know you love this. You voted for the independent redistricting committee, and we want you to overturn it. And they'll try to pass it in a low turnout special election by pushing out their base, right? But what's important, the issue that's really often undercovered, right? You have Cleaver said he's going to file a lawsuit, right? There are a bunch of Republicans filed lawsuits in California. And these lawsuits in the press and the discussion always comes from the eyes of, okay, well, why is this violating this Republican's right to vote or this Democrat right to vote? But nobody ever steps back and say, well, who loses everywhere, right? It's really the individual right to vote. And independents, they lose no matter what, because they're, if the Republicans gain power, Democrats lose. Democrats gain power as Republicans lose. And then if you're not part of either party, you lose power everywhere this occurs, right?
And that's like what our article talks about this week, too. The article that we're writing, they're going to publish in the next couple of days, is really about how if all of this is all carved up and all decided ahead of time, then when a citizen just goes in to vote, do they realize like the way that they vote isn't really gonna matter? It sort of matters like what zip code they're in, but it's not like measuring their true preference
But yeah,
when it comes down to it.
Yeah, but you take the litigation and the arguments being made, like for kind of our listeners, like these cases are generally brought by one side or the other, right? There's very, very little time. You know, the ACLUs of the world came in and they do a lot of stuff on gerrymandering and say, well, this violates the African American right to vote or the Latino right to vote or some, but nobody ever looks at it just more blindly and asks a fundamental question: why does this affect the individual right to vote, right? So, I mean, if you go back into case precedent, right, the case called Classic, really, the Supreme Court articulated that, look, if you violate the right to vote in a primary, it's just like violating it in the general election, because you can't have the full right to vote in the general election if you violate it in the primary. You have cases like Gray v. Sanders in the white primaries cases. In that case, the court said to the Democratic Party in Texas, no, you have to let African Americans participate in the primary election because that is a meaningful part of the public election process, right? But in that case, you had a race-based classification. What the court has never articulated and really never been asked directly is, our system like gerrymandering or closed primaries, how does that, forget the classification, just a voter, if we have a fundamental right to vote, and if we accept that right is a nonpartisan right, it doesn't derive from joining the Democratic Party or joining the Republican Party, but it derives from being a citizen of the United States and registering to vote. How do those systems affect your right to have a meaningful vote in the process?
I mean, they really, really do, right? And you're right. Usually it's a Democrat or Republican interest that are filing the lawsuits and not the independent interest. But I'm excited to know that you filed an amicus brief that this week in the United States Supreme Court. Chad, why don't you tell everybody about what that's about?
Well, this was fun when I had to pull my old blue book out. It's been a while since I've, my day job is doing digital media and communications. Obviously, you might recognize I have a little bit of a passion for this issue of voting rights. So when I saw this retired attorney, Michael Polio, just decided in his, he likes writing books and stuff. I got to know him over the last couple of weeks just from talking to him. What a great guy. And he decided to send his retirement and say, hey, what's up with this closed primary? It's not fair. I'm a voter. Why can't I participate in the primary? And so he brought the lawsuit in Florida. And, he shared with me, he went to the usual suspects, the big civil rights organizations of the world. And I'm not going to point any of them out individually, but, and they all kind of like initially were like, that's a great case. That's a great case. And then, oh, I can't really help you with this one. Right. So he took the case all the way to the Supreme Court, single-handedly by himself. So, I'm proud that the folks from Open Primaries reached out to me, and the folks from Forward Party, we got in touch, and we all put an amicus together to support the question he asked for the Supreme Court, which is, there's a bunch of legal arguments and stuff, but it really comes down to like, where does this right to vote derive? And if it doesn't derive from citizenship, from the nonpartisan right to vote, what's the natural consequence of a system where you have increasingly closed primaries, increasing gerrymandering? At the end of the day, you just have the two-party vehicles and the leadership that controls them running what is supposed to be a representative democracy for all of us. So that was interesting. And then literally like within 24 hours, somebody sends me a thing saying, well, here you go. The Republican Party in Texas wants to close an open primary. Cara, you've had this experience. You were involved in litigation on the Commission on Presidential Debates. You went through the fights in Maine's when Maine went and tried to create semi-open primaries. What's your take on these dynamics and like the acceleration of these issues?
Everything's gotten so close in between the Democrats and the Republicans that, it's just so few seats. They've divided up the territory very, very well amongst themselves, and they've written the rules very, very well amongst themselves. Peter used to always say that, in front of the veil, they're fighting with each other, but behind the veil, they're colluding with each other to make sure that even if it's to keep independents out, basically, and to design the whole system so that it really serves either one party or the other party, and does leave, so many people out in the cold. I guess hearing about this lawyer in Florida, it sure does make me happy. To win or lose, we still live in such a great country that would allow somebody who has, a law degree and a really good idea and a cause to take his case by himself in retirement all the way to the Supreme Court to ask this question. That just makes me really happy, win or lose. But I think overall, Chad, what I want to say about it is that the parties and the leaders of the parties are always going to take and use the power that is available to them, right? They're always going to push it as far as they can go against one another, nobody gives up power willingly, ever. And so this is just going to be probably a fight that goes on for the rest of our lives. And having independents be able to have a seat at the table and have a seat in the courtroom, that's kind of the best. That's the best that we can do, right? Because we have to go and look and see, like, where can we open up the system? Where can we make it more democratic? And it's not just opening up the primaries, which we have to do. It's not just having independent commissions so that the gerrymandering is put to a stop, but it's also getting rid of the first past the post voting. We have to basically open up the primaries and let people choose and let people rank their candidates in order of preference and have majority winners. And that really is the way out of all of this dysfunction. And, the sooner people figure it out, the sooner we'll have a more perfect union.
Well, I think, Independent Voter Project brought a similar question to the Supreme Court. Was 11 years ago when we challenged New Jersey's closed primary. We also did that we challenged California. California is nonpartisan at the state level, but we challenged that California's partisan semi-closed presidential primary elections. And then open primaries, another national organization, has filed like 4 similar lawsuits that are in different stages right now. The important being, though, that this issue is becoming more and more important today because you're seeing the level of activity on the other side. One thing I want to point out is, a lot of times we get tagged, say you're anti-party, right? We're not anti-party. I represent the Independent Voter Project, right? The parties in this and should be viewed, I believe, as agnostic. And in fact, if you take our arguments to the logical extension, we believe the parties may actually become stronger because they're forced to represent more people in the process. But all that's to say, this is one of the reasons why, and it's just coincidental timing, that we're publishing our next episode of How It Really Works, and just talking about the right to vote and whether it's actually meaningful, and if it is or isn't, how we can make it more meaningful and equal for a voter, a small I independent voter, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, nonpartisan, third party, whatever it is. That's going to be published on ivn.us. And we're going to continue these kinds of conversations where, Cara, 10 years ago, we were talking about these in the corner of the room, and, and now they seem to be becoming a little more prevalent.
It's definitely interesting to watch and to cover for Independent Voter News. And, the more things change, the more things stay the same. But I think there's a lot of people who are beginning to notice some of the inequities. And, we'll see. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens with Prop 50 in California. I'm watching it really, really closely because, you've got the Democrats in Texas and the Democrats in Missouri saying that gerrymandering is, the worst thing of all, that nobody should use their raw political power to try to tilt the playing field to one side or the other, regardless of the party. That's wrong. And then you have the Democrats in California and in Maryland and in New York and other places saying, well, if you did it, that we're going to do it too. And, it seems to me to be a kind of a race.
Well, we're
race
saving
to the bottom.
democracy. We're saving democracy. We're gonna compromise democracy to save democracy, right? It's the argument you keep hearing is, well, we have to do this to save democracy. Well, what you're talking about is literally one of the most fundamental things of democracy that you champion, that we all point to as like one of the sacred cows of reform, right?
Yeah, but I also say too, Chad, just to give some defense to it, that always in the doing of the democracy, we are improving democracy. So even if, the Democrats in California are pushing this way and the Texas Republicans are pushing that way, everybody is, using what's available to them, and that we have the courts. It's a huge mess, but it's sort of a wonderful mess too, because everybody is participating, right? Everybody is fighting for their particular side. And, hopefully too many people don't get left out. I have a little bit of a problem just thinking about how if you go into the ballot box and you live in, say, Orange County, California, how or wherever you live that's been so gerrymandered that your voice is really not a part of this. And it's all sort of been determined ahead of time by all of these partisan political actors. That's a little disheartening, but we'll get there.
Yeah. Well, and we will. And from I think the standpoint of folks like us who've been watching is like a lot of times you'll see, people comment on Facebook or they'll send us emails and they're so angry. It's like, well, it's the Republicans that started it. And then you get into 2 minutes later, somebody will, well, it was the Democrats that started it, right? You step back and you're like, this is both fighting what, you can pick some arbitrary date of when you think the war on voters, as I would refer to it started. But to your point, Cara, it's a maturation of the democratic representative process. And the one thing that gives me hope, or I see light, is that it's becoming so elevated in such a public discussion. That's what it takes to finally resolve the issue, right? Forget about what side you're on the gay marriage debate, right? That was an issue that took decades and decades in public influence, and then the court finally stepped in and kind of resolved it. Now, could that be coming back? Well, that's a whole nother argument. But these cases don't happen overnight. And I always said when we filed the first case in New Jersey, the writ to the Supreme Court, I said, nobody realistically thought they were going to pick up the case at that time. And I always tell people, I go, I don't know. One of these days we're going to file a writ and they'll pick it up. It might be next week. It could be my grandson, maybe when my grandson files in 75 years, my unborn grandson, I don't know. But at some point, the court is going to see it, that it's ripe and it's necessary for them to answer the question.
Yeah, I mean, and I think one thing we call it is losing forward, that you can lose and lose and lose, but you're still you're still moving forward.
Self-rationalization for
that's
losing,
our self.
right?
That's right. That's right. Oh, the other one is that you always learn more from losing than you do from winning. That's the other one.
I've learned so much.
Yeah, I've learned so much too. I really have. But I mean, we still live in the greatest country in the world where a retired attorney from Florida can, on his own, have a cause and take it all the way to the Supreme Court.
Not only was he attorney who took it himself, he was also the plaintiff, right? Representing himself. He just literally did it all by himself. And you know what? It's very well done, in my opinion, of my perpetually losing attorney opinion. I thought it was really well done. He teed it up well for the court, did a good job of framing the issue. But like I said, those are the things that kind of make me smile throughout. And, you see things happening all across the country, and there's as much debate and division within the reform space as there is within the parties in itself. But your point, it's all part of the process. But the fact that we're having these conversations at a substantially higher level and rate than we were even just 5, 6, 10 years ago, I think is reason for optimism for everybody. I think that's why we're publishing the story now on IVN.us. That's why we're going to continue to cover these issues. I'm so happy that I get to work with you, Cara, on a regular basis, and come back and talk with you again next week.
All right, cool. It's great to see you. Thanks for including me in the conversation. And, sometimes it's one step forward, 2 steps back, but, eventually we'll get there, or our children will, or our grandchildren will, right? As long as we, keep this healthy conversation about our democracy going and keep trying to improve it for the better.
Couldn't have said it better. We'll see you next week, everybody. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
This is the Independent Voter Podcast, sponsored by the Independent Voter Project and produced by OLAS Media. Remember, you can always find the Independent Voter Podcast or the How It Really Works series at ivn.us. Follow and subscribe at olasmedia.com.
OLAS Media.
This is the Independent Voter Podcast, sponsored by the Independent Voter Project and produced by OLAS Media. Remember, you can always find the Independent Voter Podcast or the How It Really Works series at ivn.us. Follow and subscribe at olasmedia.com.
OLAS Media.